as an overview of the history of the Spiritist Review. Luiz Lima was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. In 1990, Luiz moved to the United States, where later he came in contact with Spiritism. He has been lecturing on Spiritism in both Portuguese and English for several years, and it's a member of the Kardec Spirit Renovation Spiritist Center in Coconut Creek, Florida. Luiz holds a bachelor's degree in engineering and currently works in the computer network industry. So let's all welcome Luiz to the podium.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ligia. Stamford, Connecticut, May 2nd, 2015. That's a long way from Paris, France, April 18, 1857. That's more than 150 years, and that's how it all started. If you look at your screen here, what we see is the basic books that started everything, and we have not still be able to comprehend everything that's been written. Actually, we're very far from it, but we're trying. That's what we're here today. We're all trying, all of us, no exception. So we wanted to bring, I think part of what we wanted to do here today is to amplify a little bit this idea of the basic books by introducing in English language the first Spiritist Review for the first year, 1858. The Spiritist Review, as we're going to go along, has a tremendous amount of information. It's just unbelievable, the amount of information. So we're going to touch base a little bit on this thing. But it all starts with history. How did we get there? How did Kardec himself got to the Spiritist book? And we would have to study the history of the history, and it's going to be too much. So in simple words, it all starts all the way back in the 1300 BC with Moses bringing us the first revelation in a strange and different way for our standards today, because he brings us what we now know as the Ten Commandments. One of them being, for example, don't kill. Now, we all know. Do we still kill? A lot. So it hasn't been comprehended. We're living 4,000 years ago when we do this, or when we are in favor of something like this. So when he brought the first revelation, it had to be imposed on us. Can you imagine Moses bringing down a list of 10 things and telling to his people, hey people, let's get together here, let's discuss this little list here? It wasn't going to work. It had to be imposed on us so we could get the very first feeling of, oh, there's a right and there's a wrong. That's how it all started. 1,300 years later, or a little more, Jesus comes and reinforces that in a slightly different way by touching the very core of that message. And that core is, you already know by now, so I don't have to impose anything on you. I'm going to give you counsel. This is a counseling approach. He will say things like to the stoned woman, or the one to be stoned, don't do this again. He doesn't condemn anybody. He doesn't say anything in terms of threatening anyone. He is a counselor. So he brings that, and time goes by, and we're still trying to learn. We haven't learned much of it, apparently. Not necessarily us here in this room. I'm talking about the planet in general. And then we needed kind of an explanation for that. Because one thing is, I can tell you, don't kill. I'm imposing that on you. Then Jesus comes and explains and tells us, well, if I were you, I wouldn't do this. But it would be very nice to know why. So that's where the third revelation comes, with the explanation of it. Now I know why I shouldn't kill. And it makes a lot more sense. Because in the beginning, it wouldn't make sense. Moses would say, don't kill, and I would argue with him. I would say, well, I just killed 3 people yesterday. How come I can't kill today? It would make sense in those days. But now it's different. Now there's something called responsibility. And that's embedded in the very core of Spiritism. That's a basic concept that we all need to learn, and we all need to take every day seriously in our lives. So it all starts in 1857 with the Spirit's book, which brings us some interesting information, of course. It has, the first edition of the Spirit's book has 500 questions and answers. That's the format, questions and answers. And Kardec will address different things and touching different things in life in general. But the first edition has, it was published with 1,500 copies, and it got sold in 2 months. That's something major, because if you think about the time, and the church is on our necks, they are right there watching you, and this book gets sold out completely, 1,500 copies in 2 months, that means we want answers. If you go back in time and to think about it, I want my answers. I don't have my answers. So it became in quotes, a problem for the church, because they had to deal with that, and where are my answers, right? We wanted the answers. Within his lifetime, the Spirit's book was published 15 times, republished, 15 editions in Kardec's 12 years of after the publication. That's also major. That's unbelievable. And it still sells today. I'm sure we're selling some of them today. The Spirit's book in 1864, and that's a few years after its initial publication, it was put in the blacklist of the church. People can't read that because it brings information. We don't want that. We, the church, don't want you to know anything. So we're going to put this book on the blacklist. And why is that? Because it's a far departure from the basic dogmas and rituals of the church. If the church wants to keep going on its dogmas established by humans, not by God or anything like this, they can't have the Spirit's book because it goes against that. Spiritism doesn't have any of that. It gives us a completely different perspective about life and death, where death doesn't exist anymore. And that's a far departure from the classic concept. It invites us to deeply take a fresh look of things like God, heaven, hell, responsibility, like I said. So we are held responsible for things that we do. And that's a far departure from what the church was used to. And the book then, on its title or subtitle, Kardec explains what the book is going to talk about. And it's a long subtitle. It's right here on the screen. So it talks about the immortality of the soul, the nature of spirits, their relationship with humankind, moral laws, which is something we are still struggling to learn, present life, future life, destiny of humanity. So just by looking at this phrase, which is the subtitle of the book, you can see how big this thing is. And that's one publication, the first publication. And from here, we're going to develop a whole concept of different books. If we were to divide the Spirit's book, actually Kardec did that for us. It is divided in 4 books or 4 parts, depends on how you see it. So we actually have an introduction and 4 different parts. And there's consistency between the whole Spiritist literature. Out of the first part, out of the introduction, Kardec later on writes another book. So he takes a little introduction, makes a book out of it to explain more. You see, the whole thing about Spiritism is explaining, knowing why, amplifying the information. So in the out of the introduction, he publishes What is Spiritism, which is a book that addresses many of the questions that he was receiving by letter, by people talking to him, by people attacking him, because we wanted my answers. I want my answers. You said this, now I have this question. You said that, now I'm thinking about this. So can you imagine the mailbox of Allan Kardec? We complain about junk mail, and this is nothing compared to his. And another thing is, there is no internet. There's no copy and paste an answer from one person to another. He's handwriting this thing or typewriting. It's very complicated. It's hard for us to imagine. But this man was able to just go and do it. And he did it. So it's a book written by him, not by spirits, by him, Allan Kardec, responding to all these things and, touching concepts and basic objections from different people, mostly people who didn't understand some of the concepts. So it explains also what is and what is not Spiritism. That's important, because you look at the book and say, what is Spiritism? But it's also important to know what it's not, so we don't get things mixed up, like, sometimes we see it. So that gets published in 1859 out of the introduction of the Spirit's book. Now, out of another part, which is part 2, yeah, look at that, comes the Medium's book in 1861. Okay, it's published in 1861 and comes from the part 2, and it's going to touch on the experimental part of Spiritism. It's going to touch about the phenomena that Allan Kardec was studying when he actually got into this thing. It's going to explain some of it. It's going to give us a study guide on how to study Spiritism, how to look at this, how to organize your studies, your thoughts, to be able to understand what's being said. Then there's a third book that comes out of the part 4, the part 3 actually, which is the moral laws, and he expands the moral laws by publishing another book, the Gospel According to Spiritism. As he goes along expanding, he is obviously helped by the Spirit. So we're going to see a lot of passages in that book that were dictated by spirits, discarnate spirits, and it will touch about moral laws. He will teach us how to do things right, what's wrong. He'll say things about love, charity, fraternity, and everything that we know or should know. Then out of book number 4, which is about hopes and consolations, he publishes another book, which is Heaven and Hell. Heaven and Hell takes a different concept about the classic heaven and hell, explaining that this is not a physical location, there's no geographical location for these things. It's a state of mind, and it has to do with divine justice. He will explain the difference between divine justice, human justice, and he will perform several analyses about it. It's a great book. It's divided in 2 parts. The first part, he will touch about the concepts of Spiritism. The second part, he will publish, fully published, transcripts of mediumistic sessions that he was having and participated. So it invites us to a fresh look about punishment, which is something that we still struggle today about it. So you see, from that one first book, a lot of things came out. And he takes a last shot by bringing the book of Genesis. And this book will pick apart from books 1 and 2, and will explain about the planet itself, the physical evolution of the planet. It will address miracles and will explain about fluids and how things happen. It's not our purpose today to do this, but it's part of it. So you see, that one little book evolved to at least 5. So the whole thing becomes 6. These 6 books, let's just lay them out side by side here. As they are being published, other things are happening. So we'll see things happening at different times. For example, in 1858, that is January 1st, that's less than 1 year after the original publication of the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec feels the need to explain a lot more. Because the Spirit's book, it doesn't really go deeply in explanation. It's answers. He will make the questions. By the way, he was writing these questions ahead of time to ask the Spirit. So his hand is on this thing. Totally. He is a big part of why somebody had to ask the questions. That was him. And as he was, after the publication of the Spirit's book, he decided that we needed more information. We needed to know more. And this thing is very dynamic because things are happening. So he decided to publish the Spirit's book until his death in 1869. So it goes from January of 1859 through April of 1858 through April of 1869. We're going to come back to the Spiritist review in a bit. More things happen. Right after that, April 1st, he founds the first Spiritist center in the world, the Spiritist Society of Paris, where they will study the phenomena, now in groups of people that will be there trying to understand, get the moral standards out of these meetings. It was founded by him, but he had one spiritual president. That's very interesting, St. Louis. And we can see that in the Spiritist Review, there are several articles about the minutes of the meetings that they had. In these meetings, we had spirits, such as St. Augustine, St. Louis, and others. It's not a meeting like ours here. It's a lot more. It's a whole different concept. So the purpose of this foundation is to develop and learn about the Spiritist science. All right, time goes by, more things happen. We have then in 1858, late 1858, he publishes another book which is not really well known by that name, which is a study instructions, practical instructions on how to study Spiritism. This, we could say, it's kind of a first edition of the Medium's book. So later on, he adds a lot of information to this book, and it becomes the Medium's book, but it started right here in late 1858. Then we have the second edition of the Spirit's book. So from the original 500 questions, 501 questions, we go to 1,019, double. So it's a lot more information, and then it gets the classic 4-book or 4 parts that we know today. Okay, so you see, everything that he did, as we go along and we see this from outside the box, there's consistency. There's a tremendous mind behind all this thing. In October 9th of 1851, Allan Kardec sends a set of 300 books to Spain because they were going to be sold in Spain. Spain is the part of Europe where the Inquisition is stronger and is obviously against everything he was doing. So these 300 books, here's a list of the books. They were burned in public plaza, So they never got to be sold. And Allan Kardec said, well, if they're burning these books, there's something interesting about it. So everybody should read. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Okay, so time goes by, and then in January 15, 1862, he publishes another book, which is called Spiritism in its Simplest Expression. It's a little tiny book. It's like 30 pages, which is the minimum that you can know about Spiritism. Usually it's a book that you want to give to somebody who doesn't really know anything about Spiritism, but they're interested, they mention some interest. So what is this exactly? It's just 30 pages. It's very interesting. It will touch the very core of Spiritism. Okay? All right, so then later on, I'm just struggling with this, but it's working. He publishes in 1862 a book called Voyage Spirit, where he travels through France and through different Spiritist centers. And it's a very interesting book because these are speeches that he did on Spiritist centers. That's him, Allan Kardec, making the speeches. There's a lot of information. Not only that, they publish the questions that people make. They publish the Q&A sessions. So Allan Kardec was responding himself to these questions. It's a very interesting book. It brings a lot of new information also, because it's himself addressing everything. Okay, and then later on we have another book. It's called a Rational Catalog. What this is a set. It's a list. It's a list of 200 books that everybody that wants to have a serious Spiritist library at home or at a Spiritist center should have. Very interesting. In this list of 200 books, the last part, it's divided by groups, by parts. The last part is a set of books against Spiritism. That's how solid Spiritism is. It doesn't say, here's my index, here's my blacklist. There is no blacklist. Read everything. Make sense out of it. If you read everything that attacks Spiritism and you're not sure, that means you don't know Spiritism yet. Go study. That's what this is for. There is no fear. There is no, let's hide this book because it might not be very interesting. There is no such a thing. That's how courageous this man was. So then we have all these things happening, and all these books. Basically, Spiritism is a bookish religion. But in the Medium's book in 1861, when he publishes, there's a very interesting passage. So this is 1861. Not all the books were published yet. But this is what it says. What is the method of study? There are books out there. How do I study this thing? And then he publishes this phrase here. For those who desire to acquire this preliminary understanding through our works, we recommend the following order. So he puts an order to this thing. Book number 1 that we should read. What is Spiritism? Book number 2, the Spirit's book. Book number 3, the Medium's book. And book number 4, Spiritist Review. So the Spiritist Review has its place in it. It's not something that he didn't have anything to do, so yeah, let me write a few things in here to get myself busy. It wasn't that. There's a lot more than just this. So when we look at the whole set of 12 volumes, these are the French editions, and this is our first American edition this year. We're publishing, you can pre-order today, later on. What is this thing about? What is the Spiritist Review? So we can see here, this is his phrase, this is himself explaining what it is. It's a diverse collection of facts, theoretical explanations. Again, explanations. The Spirit's book sometimes answer things, but it doesn't really go deep in explaining. He will detail the explanation for us that complement the scope of what is found in the two preceding books, forming in a certain way their application. So he takes the answers from the Spirit's book and tries to make something practical out of it so we can understand better. So the purpose of the Spiritist Magazine, again, this is a phrase by Allan Kardec himself, aiming at providing a communication media to those interested in these questions, everything we're talking about, and to connect through a common bond those who understand Spiritism from its true moral point of view, which is practice of good and evangelical charity towards everyone. The Spirit's book will tell things such as, like St. Augustine, do what I did when I was on earth, incarnate. I would review my day at the end of the day. And so if you read that passage and say, okay, I'm going to do that. So at the end of the day, you go over before lying in bed and you say, yeah, today, at 2 o'clock, I had a meeting and I didn't really respond quite well to my boss. I think he got mad. Well, okay, I did it. That's fine. I understood and I take responsibility for it. 2 days later, I go to another meeting and I do the same thing. And I revise I did the same thing. 5 days later, I go to another meeting, I responded to it. That's not helping. That's not helping. I'm doing what I'm told to do, but I need more. I need more explanation. Why should I do exactly, and how am I going to collect that information? How am I'm going to use this in my own favor? And this is all detailed in several articles of the Spiritist Review. That's why it becomes so important, because it goes to the core of things. Okay? So it is a large production. It has 12 volumes, 135 issues. He never missed one volume since he started on January 1st, 1858 to the last day. Allan Kardec departed, or died, if you wish, by 5 minutes after he delivered to the guy who would carry out the last set published of the Spiritist Magazine. So he published everything. He had the set at his home. The guy knocks at his door to pick up and take it away for distribution. He delivers that and drops that. That's how it happened. So to the last minute, he was working on this thing. So what does the Spiritist Magazine has in it? What is the content of this thing? So first of all, when you read the codification, at times you will say, for example, Spirit's book, in a lot of the questions, there's a question, there's the answer by the Spirit, and Kardec puts some comments in a lot of the questions, not all, but in a lot of them. When you look at those comments, sometimes we get caught. We go like, wow, this guy is brilliant. What a thing. What a closing for the question. And it kind of bothers us because why didn't I think of that? And you keep reading and that keeps coming back. And when you look at the Spiritist Magazine, when you start reading, you're going to understand why Kardec was that way. Because it kind of reveals who he is as a man, as a person. The Spirit's book doesn't tell you that. You kind of think it's a brilliant spirit because of some of the phrases, some of the things he said. But in here, in the Spiritist Review, you're going to find out for good who he is, what kind of spirit, advanced spirit he was. And then you comprehend it had to be somebody like him to explain to us what Spiritism is, what moral standards are. It couldn't be anybody else different. It had to be a highly evolved spirit, and he was the right person. So number 2 thing that we see in the Spiritist Magazine is things that will address the societies and the groups, the Spiritist centers, how to handle things, how to do things. He will talk about the functionality of these Spiritist centers, how they should operate, what not to do, because it will generate future problems. What is the role of the Spiritist center within the society, and what is the role of each person within the Spiritist center, that you carry out your behavior. If it's a bad behavior and tell people I'm Spiritist, that's what people are going to attach to Spiritism. So he talks about that. Number 3 thing that we're going to see in the Spiritist Review throughout the volumes is about the Spiritist centers themselves. And the number 4 is he will take a lot of communications from spirits, a lot of things that he gathered in this mediumistic meetings, and he will, at length, he will talk about it and explain things. He will take communications from spirits, similar to what he does in Heaven and Hell, but a lot more in details. So the Spiritist Magazine, in his own words, is a tool for us to understand what we didn't understand until then. It's very dynamic because things change. It's like a regular magazine. Why do we have magazines today? Because things change. So it's either monthly or weekly, whatever it is. It keeps bringing more information as they become available. That's what the Spiritist Magazine does in the Spiritist concept. In his own words, he will say to us in the Spiritist Magazine, Spiritism is a philosophical doctrine with religion effects, as in any spiritualist philosophy, because it inevitably reaches to the roots of all religions, God, soul, and future life. But it is not a constituted religion, and that's critical for us to understand. Because we all say Spiritism is science, religion, and philosophy. And we go like, yeah, science because of the experiments and the mediumistic sessions, okay. Philosophy because it brings a set of standards, a set of behaviors that we want to follow. And religion. And then the things gets complicated, because if we tell somebody outside Spiritism that Spiritism is a religion, the first thing they're going to attach is, okay, what is your set of dogmas and rituals? Because that's what a religion in the dictionary is. That's not what it is. It is religion in the philosophical sense, not in the dictionary sense. There is no ritual, there is no dogma. That makes people outside Spiritism a little bit, they get thrown out because they don't understand that. Because if you go out of here, religion is a set of dogmas and rituals by dictionary standards. It is not for us. So within Spiritism, you will ask some people, is Spiritism a religion? And the answer gets complicated because it kind of depends who is the person you're answering to. It's strange. But it is, because we got to be a little careful, because if you say straight out, yes, it is, then the question comes, what is your sacred book? What is your set of dogmas and your set of rituals? And we need to have that very well understood, so we don't carry out the wrong information out there. If you want to help people, we want to help people the right way. So Spiritism then becomes this trio of philosophy, science, and religion. But again, religion in the philosophical center. There is no sacred book. There is no dogma. There is nothing like this. If we take all these books that we discussed today, and here's you can see some of them, or the basic books. If we were to count the number of pages, roughly, this is not a straight number, 10 pages more, 10 pages less, it's not going to make any difference, okay? We would get to something like this. So the simplest book is the Spiritism is a Simple Expression. It's just about 30 pages. And you can see the others. What is Spiritism? 220. The others are in the 500 range. Okay, so that's about the medium size of these books. Let's say 500 to 600 pages. The Spiritist Magazine is a little bit different. It has over 4,500 pages, like John said, 4,600 pages. When you look at this graph, it tells you something. This is not a man writing to, because he doesn't want to retire. That's not what it is. This is a man who committed deeply to its purpose on earth. And he did it from day one to the last day, to the last second of his life, to the last nanosecond, if you want to go that far. He devoted his own life to this. The Spiritist Magazine, for 12 years, not a single month it didn't fail, any single month. Every year, every month, you're going to see one issue out there, one copy out there. So a set of 4,600 pages, that beats the whole rest of things by far. And sometimes we look at the Spirit's book and say, wow, this is huge. Well, not really. It's a small book compared to his production. The Spiritist Magazine is a massive production. It's his largest production, and it has a lot of information. If we were to, in his own words, if we collect from Allan Kardec itself in the Spiritist Magazine what it is, if we collect pieces and put it all together in words, it would be very hard. So we're going to do little symbols. Okay, the first symbol is the Spiritist Magazine is the making of. We are going to find out how Spiritism came about. What he, Allan Kardec, was doing to make it happen. What he was researching, why he would agree to this thing and not to that thing. What he was being told by the spirits. What his approach was to this thing. You will tell us about the Spiritist Center, the creation of the first Spiritist Center in the world. So it's the making of. We find out how Spiritism came about, which makes a difference when you study, because you know how things came about. There's a full-blown fundamental explanation for all of that. But it's also a blog. It's dynamic. It changes every day. Still today it changes. And how does it change today if the book is being written and it doesn't change, the book doesn't change? No, but quantum physics changes science to tell he was right every day. Genetics changes every day to tell us he was right too. That's the change. The change is not in the text of the book. The change is in the way we see things, and he was right all along. And we see this every day in our lives. It's also an instrument of dissemination of information. For example, think about this. You are in 1857, let's say in the 1860s, okay? And there's something called church, which is on your neck, and the church has a black list of books, and this book is in it. So you're completely afraid of touching this book. You don't want to know, you don't want to ask about, although you might, it would be nice to know, but I can't. It's difficult for people at the time. So the Spiritist Magazine is used to disseminate part of the information in a different way, because it's not blacklisted. It's not seen as a book that's going to stick things to people's head by the church. It didn't have that blacklist approach. It also amplifies everything that's been written by him in all the other books and by the spirits. You will give us more explanation about things. You will go deeper in some of the things, especially punishment, things like the problematic words at the time: heaven, hell, punishment, God. You will deeply address those things. And it's also very dynamic. We go from the wheel to quantum physics, and like I said, the book doesn't change. What changes is us making sense of it. The book has already made sense many, many years ago, but we don't capture that. We're capturing that now. So Allan Kardec, with all his massive production and all the things that he tried to do, and he did very well, he tries to bring us, if you read all the books, especially the Spiritist Review, you're going to hear him saying all the time, Spiritist is a science, and then he will touch about philosophy and religion. But most of the times he will start, Spiritism is a science. Because for him, that's how it started, with the phenomena and everything. He was studying that. So it's a science. So for us today, in 2015, we could probably say it is a science. It's the science of moral transformation. It is the thing that I'm going to study to understand, and it comes a long way from 1857 to today. And it's going to make me understand why I need to change my moral standards. And there's one that I have to follow. That one was addressed to us in the Spirit's book, question 625. What is the perfect model? Who should I go after? Who should I try to be like? And Jesus is the answer. So Spiritism is this science of moral principles, science of moral transformation. You're going to hear about Spiritism today. You're going to hear a lot about the Spiritist Magazine, and I hope you enjoy your day here. Thank you very much. Good morning to all.